Hello and welcome to another interview with Litigators Corner. Can you imagine filing a lawsuit in the morning and getting a call from defense counsel in the afternoon? Well, Janet Falk, who is a chief strategist at Falk Communications and Research, is going to tell us how you can achieve that as lawyers. And as lawyers, we don't often think about why the use of the media and the importance of it in our litigation strategy, but as litigators and as lawyers, this is an essential part of our arsenal. And we are, frankly, falling down on the job if we don't include this, and all attorneys don't include this. So Janet, I am just delighted to have you here. Janet and I met because I attended an MCLE that Janet was involved with, and I was so impressed with her that I reached out to her, and I have actually incorporated some of Janet's tips into my own practice, and I know that we've talked about it. But Janet, thank you for being here today, and please tell us about yourself and what you do.
Thank you so much, Hillary, for inviting me. It's my pleasure to speak to the Beverly Hills Bar Association. As you mentioned, I am a public relations professional. I also provide marketing communication services. I work with attorneys, accountants, business owners, financial services firms, and consultants. I help them in a variety of ways. One is to get them in the news, as you mentioned, and another way is with their online presence, which might be their LinkedIn profile, their website, their client newsletter, placing articles in publications, and so on.
And Janet, you have an impressive and eclectic background. Can you tell us just a bit about that? I thought it was very interesting.
Yes, I have worked in a variety of settings. Currently, I work as a consultant to the legal community, but before that, I worked on Wall Street, and before that, I was a college professor of Spanish. So you can see that my career spans a great many venues, and it gives me a different perspective in dealing with my clients. I can deal with financial matters, which many public relations professionals cannot. They just see it as math and don't understand that money makes the world go round.
I know one of the reasons a lot of lawyers want to be in the news is to attract new clients and for the publicity, but there are a lot of other good reasons to want to be in the news and to make good use of the media. Can you tell us about those?
Certainly. Attracting new clients is a major driver, but let's think about the many other audiences that you want to be in touch with. For example, you want to think about your referral sources. If you're a trust and estates attorney and you get referrals from accountants and from financial advisors, when they see you in the news, then they will think, aha, that applies to my client, Barbara Jones. I should get in touch with that attorney because they understand the consequences of this change in the tax law. It may be for your own branding and thought leadership. If you want to be known as the attorney who advocates for women in the workplace, then you want to be seen talking about issues that women face in terms of discrimination or pregnancy, being a cause for dismissal, things on that order. Maybe you want to keep in touch with the attorneys in your circle, people that you worked with at your prior firm, people that you went to law school with, people who served on a committee with you at the Beverly Hills Bar Association, people who were on the other side of the litigation that you concluded recently. Maybe you want to attract new employees. Doesn't every associate want to work for that hot firm that's always getting in the news? And even laterals will be interested to join a firm that's being mentioned often in the media. And finally, let's say you serve on the board of a nonprofit. When you speak to the media, you can be pointing out that advocacy, whether it's for social justice or for voting or for the environment. So you can see, Hillary, there are many audiences that you can reach through the media, and you can be raising your flag and becoming more known for your area of practice or for your advocacy.
It's always enticing, I think, for them to say, oh, wow, that attorney's on the news. They must really know what they're doing. Hey, I want that. Nice. It's if I know that we talked about an attorney, it's a bad idea for an attorney not to return a phone call or to say no comment. But there are also things that they should think about in terms of they should think about what they're going to say before they talk to me. Could you tell us a bit about why that's an important part of any litigation strategy or representation strategy?
Right. I think you want to think like a reporter to some extent. And you want to think about the 5 W's. Hillary, you know what the 5 W's are, right?
Who, what, when, where, and why, which I learned from
Exactly. Exactly. Now, who is going to read this news story? What are they going to think about? And what do you want them to do next? When is this particularly time sensitive? So is this a matter that there's some compliance deadline and your client is going to have to keep up with that? Where are they looking for news and information? Is it in the general newspaper like the LA Times? Is it in a local paper like the Santa Monica Press? Or is it in a trade publication like the Hollywood Reporter? And then why should anyone care what you have to say? So thinking about who you want to reach, what you want them to think about, and what you want them to do next. Whether or not, when, if it is time sensitive, where they're looking for their news and information, and why they should care. Is this information going to help an individual or a business owner or a company to save time, save money, or make more money? That's what's going to motivate the reader to want to read the article and learn more about what you have to say.
So when you're reaching, I know that you've recommended that when you're reaching out to or getting in a database of reporters, often I know you have a presentation called Why Me and Not Her, Why Her and Not Me. And the answer is often is because they asked, because they knew about that person and they didn't know about the other person. And why is it so important to put yourself out to the media as a source of knowledge or information about a specific one? I know we've talked about that. How do I go about that? I think a lot of people don't have the first idea how to do that.
Right. I use a tool that's called a media profile. And this is not your CV and this is not your bio, but it answers a number of questions that a reporter would ask. The first question is, why you? Why should anyone talk to Hillary Johns and not somebody else who has a similar practice? And the second question is, why now? What is happening now in the marketplace or in the local area or in the industry that people need to know more about this subject? And then the third question, as I mentioned before, is why should anyone care? When you develop a media profile, and we are going to include some information about this when the broadcast is made available, you explain your background in very broad strokes. And then you highlight more specific areas that you focus on in your practice. And then, and this is the most important part, you highlight issues and topics that people should be paying more attention to, but they're not. And so a smart reporter will recognize that these issues are flying under the radar, so to speak, and that if the reporter jumped on these issues, it would be new news to their readers, and they would want to know more about it. In developing your media profile, you will give this background information and highlight these hot topics and issues that people need to know more about. One more thing I like to include in the profile is a quote. So this is a sample of what you might say if you got a reporter on the phone, and they would understand that there is a human being and a person behind the media profile, and you can show a little personality, which is always a good thing.
And once they get to know you, they're more likely to call you. I mean, it's just human nature. We tend to contact people we know and go, oh, let's talk to such and such first. Maybe they know of something or know
Right.
someone who could help. And we had talked, I know we've had a few conversations about the situation where you're representing a client and either a complaint's been filed or the news has called your office. And what do you do in those situations?
I think that media strategy is a very important part of litigation strategy. Either you proactively are going to contact the press and let them know about this matter, or they are going to find out about it because once the document is filed in court, it's a public document, and they are going to contact you because your name is on the complaint. I think it's very important to prepare ahead of time and decide with the client whether or not you're going to proactively pursue this. You must have the client's permission, and it must be in the client's best interest for you to be in touch with the media. As part of your preparation, what I recommend is you draft a press release. And I'm sure your colleagues have seen what press releases are. They probably had to approve them from time to time. But this is slightly different. The idea of this press release is to get the reporter interested enough in the matter that they will want to call you and ask you more questions about it. So you want to have information about the case, who's the plaintiff, who are the defendants, where's the court where it was filed, who's the attorney representing the plaintiff, and then a little bit of information about the allegations. And then you want to have your quote. And your quote is going to be something snappy and memorable that the reporter, if they don't have time to call you on the phone, they will be able to take the quote exactly out of the press release and drop it into their news story. Now, when you file your litigation, you're going to get a copy of the stamped complaint, and I recommend you put that in a Dropbox so that you can take the link and put the link to the complaint into the press release. Not every reporter knows how to navigate that system and how to retrieve the complaint on their own. And then you distribute the press release, whether by using a paid service or sending customized emails to reporters who follow the industry and follow the legal industry. And then you follow up with them, of course, maybe not yourself, your assistant or your public relations consultant, to make sure that the right reporters have gotten the information and will be able to read the release, get access to the complaint, and then ask you any questions about the matter.
We had talked a bit about when you represent a defendant, there's a lot of things a litigator is thinking about. Thinking like, oh dear God, we've been sued, the client's upset. But from a media relations perspective, what are the pointers that you think, the takeaways that you think any good litigator needs to know when contacted by the press?
Right. It's always a good idea to answer the phone. The reporter is not going to go away. Saying no comment means this looks very bad. And saying no comment means they're going to find another source. They're going to find a neighbor or a disgruntled vendor or a disgruntled employee who's going to give their side of the story. This is not going to be helpful to your client. What I recommend is you take the call from the reporter and you say, I'd really like to talk with you, but I have someone in my office or I have someone on the other line. So please let me know your phone number and your email address and exactly what you'd like to discuss, because you may not have seen the complaint, exactly what you'd like to discuss. And I promise I will get back to you in 30 minutes. Hillary, there is no news story that is so important that it cannot wait for 30 minutes, especially when you are the person that the reporter is dying to talk to. And in that 30 minutes, you will contact the client and you will get permission from the client and you will agree whether or not it's in the client's best interest to call the reporter back. And then you will work up what it is that you're going to talk about. Most of the time, you're going to say something that answers the question, but doesn't really provide much substance. To say, this is another frivolous lawsuit. We've seen so many of these. We're going to litigate this vigorously. And you don't want to demean the other party by any means, but you could reflect and say, this reminds me of the case where thus and such. And so that will tend to dissuade the reporter from seeing this as a serious news story. So I do recommend that you respond to the reporter, that you reply, but don't necessarily give very substantive answers. And in that way, you may not be in the story, but at least you won't be in the story saying an attorney for so-and-so was not available for comment, which reflects very poorly on the client.
Because it looks like you're evading or you're just trying to put people off and things like that. During a trial, I know that there are limited things that you can say. Often judges have gag orders and confidentiality, and you can't influence the jury. But we'd also talked about a mediation strategy as part of a post-litigation strategy is just as important for a plaintiff and a defendant. And you don't always know, maybe the press hasn't bothered you at all, but then they picked up on this story and say, oh, I'd really be interested in this verdict. So what do you recommend for a plaintiff's attorney when they're talking about their post-litigation strategy?
I think you have to have a similar strategy of preparing a press release in advance, and you should prepare for both outcomes, right? Because it may go your way, but it may not go your way. So when you get the final verdict, then you can sprinkle in some reference to what the verdict is, and then you can go out and talk about how justice was served or how justice was not served, and whether or not you're going to take it another step. It's important to provide the context. This is not only about your client. This is your client as a member of a class or as a member of an industry. So I think it's very important for the reporters who are covering it not from the legal angle, but from the industry angle, to situate it in that broader context.
So say something, this was a good verdict for workers' rights, or something like, I'm glad that other people are going to see this, or we're glad that this person was imprisoned because it was a just verdict and maybe helps other victims come forward, things like that.
Right, exactly, because it's not always about just one case. You may be setting a precedent, and it may be bad law, so you want to talk about that if that's the case. But it's always important to consider that the audience goes beyond the legal community, and you want to be thinking about who else out there is going to be thinking along these lines in that broader industry context.
And would it be a similar advice for in the situation where you're representing the defendant, and sort of just in terms of the preparation and the terms of a press release, and sort of knowing what you're going to say and being prepared for any outcome depending on the outcome, because you don't really know what it's going to be. You don't know what
right. You should be prepared for either outcome, but I don't think you need to issue a press release, because it's not, unless it's something that's so dramatically unexpected, then that would be newsworthy. But generally, I don't think you need to issue a press release, but you should be prepared for phone calls.
And I know that we talked about, say you got a great verdict, and it does happen, and this is big news. What can an attorney do to promote their decision or verdict? And what happens after they get, for example, if this is appealed? What do you recommend in those situations?
Right. So I'm going to change it up a little bit, Hillary, and I'm going to tell you about a case that I became aware of, where it was an appellate decision about a real estate matter. And this is an example really to learn from. So someone posted on LinkedIn, an attorney of my acquaintance, that he got this great decision at the appellate level. And within a week, a dozen firms had issued client alerts saying, this is what this decision means for the real estate industry. Now, the attorney who actually got the decision wakes up and realizes that everybody else has written a client alert, and so he has to write a client alert too. Well, too late. Everybody else knows what's going on. So what I would have recommended, had I been involved in this, is to prepare immediately after oral argument for the outcome on either way, and to write a press release, and to write a client alert, and to have that on the shelf. Because it's not like a verdict where you're going to hear. It's going to take a while for the appellate to make their decision. So you have this document on the shelf where it's the press release and it's the client alert. And then when you get the decision, you can sprinkle in references to the language of the decision. And then you are ready to go, and you can issue it to the real estate industry press and the legal press, or whatever press is going to be concerned about this. And you can issue the client alert. And that way, you leave everybody else in the dust. Now, you can take this a step further. You can talk to industry groups and say, what is the future of X after the Y decision? And that could be you, and maybe also the client, talking to the peers of the client in their industry group about what is the impact of the decision and what it's going to mean for operations or for compliance or for revenue, whatever. You can also think, what if this was an issue of compliance? can you develop a checklist of things that people in the industry need to do as a result of this decision? So there are other ways that you can make available the information behind the decision that would point to your thought leadership by having a client alert, by making a presentation to an industry group, by creating a checklist for people in the industry of what best practices are.
The difference being whether you're behind the group or you're way ahead of the pack here, and you're the first one to come out. People are going, "Oh, that's interesting. This is the only source," as opposed to Googling the case and finding 15 to 20 different articles and like, I'm not going to read these because I already know about this. And they all say the same thing. That's a huge advantage.
Right. It's your case, and so you're the one who's going to hear first about the decision. So, line everything up and be prepared. So when the decision drops, you can be very nimble and get out there and promote it. Everyone else is not going to be as privy. They're, busy performing their work for their clients at their practice, and they're not going to pay attention until the very end when the decision comes out, and then they'll be behind.
Jen, I know that we had talked about another subject which is near and dear to many LA attorneys' hearts, which is comments to the press by a third party or by a third party attorney. A lot, you see this a lot, CNN, Hollywood Reporter, all these people, they have no involvement with the case whatsoever. It's not their client. Maybe they're in the industry, but they're commenting upon it, and they get as much press often as the case does or more because they're opining on these issues. How do we as lawyers get ourselves into that position where we're able to make those comments to the press?
Right. If it's a case that everyone is following, then you want to tailor the media profile that I mentioned a little while earlier and make it more specific to the matter that everybody's talking about. So here's another example. I'm sure you remember the Boston Marathon bombing case, and it's come up in the news recently because of issues around the death penalty. But back in the day when this case was being litigated, most of the commentary on a day-to-day basis was by local attorneys in Boston, principally from Foley and Lardner. Now, when the verdict came out, I saw an article that quoted an attorney from Miami. Now, you're thinking, why are they talking to him and not me? I'll bet this is what happened. This attorney in Miami contacted reporters who were following the case and said, I'm a former federal prosecutor. That's why you. I've tried terrorism cases. That's why now. And here's my contact information. Here's my phone number. Here's my home phone number. Here's my cell phone number. Here's my email address. Call me, text me. I will comment on this case. If it's guilty, it means this. If it's not guilty, it means that. So take your media profile and tailor it to the need of the reporter who has to fill that space in their news story. The reporter is looking for someone who can authoritatively comment on what this case means and what is the broader context. And when you tailor your media profile accordingly, then you will be the one the reporter calls.
And Janet, what other tips do you have for us litigators just when we're going into these situations, working with a client or maybe dealing with the press for the first time? Some lawyers have experience, some don't. I mean, it sort of runs the gamut. If you had to summarize what you would recommend for attorneys and what they need to be aware of, what would you tell them?
I think we've covered a lot of ground here, but I want to point out something that comes up from time to time, and people worry about a crisis situation, right? So imagine that you represent a shopping mall, right? And you get a call from a reporter and you don't know what's going on because you're in your office, you don't know what happened at the shopping mall. And so you're, of course, going to follow my strategy of find out exactly who the reporter is, their contact information, what they want to talk about, because you want to say to the reporter, look, I may have to consult with some other people in order to get you the information you need, and I do want to be helpful to you. Now you've aligned yourself with the reporter, so they'll be a little more forgiving of your asking for the 30 minutes. Now, in that 30 minutes, you're going to get in touch with the client and make sure that they're in agreement that you should talk to the press, and it's in the client's best interest that you talk to the press. And this is what you're going to say. The 3 R's, which are not reading, writing, and arithmetic, but they are regret, recompense, and reform. So what happened at the shopping mall was some person's ex got very angry and went after them and, shot the person and one or two other bystanders. Okay. So this is regret. We're so very sorry that this incident took place, and we extend our sympathies to the families of the wounded and the deceased. That's regret. Now here's recompense. The person who was killed has some teenage children, so we're going to set up a college fund so that we can provide for them. And now here's the reform. We're going to introduce a new evaluation of our security procedures. We're going to look at everything from top to bottom and bottom to top, and we're going to hire an outside consultant to do this, and we will implement their recommendations so that this kind of situation will never, ever, never, ever happen again. In the case of a crisis, you want to pause, find out what information you can, get back to the reporter in 30 minutes, as I said, and assuming it is in the best interest of the client and they are agreeable. And you'll deal with the regret, recompense, and reform in order to answer the reporter's questions.
That is super. And you do see this a lot in the news where you see these sort of statements and you're thinking like, how fast did they get to it? Now we know. It's from talking to people like you who are able to guide us through this process. Janet, this has been super. I so appreciate you making the time for the Beverly Hills Bar Association. I know that I've really benefited from your insights and hope to continue to. And thank you so much, and you stay safe.
My pleasure, Hillary, and I look forward to talking again soon.